Sexton, a later 20th century writer and female author. And the work of hers that we're studying this week in Celebration of My Uterus, which is a poem, and another poem of hers called Cinderella. So the one poem in Celebration of My Uterus is in our anthology. However, the other poem, Cinderella, is posted in our week 9 lesson folder, so you can find it there. So it's also at the end of the course schedule. So either place you can read it. Really good poems. If you look in the written out lecture, Anne Sexton, there's a photo of her. She appears to be in like a library type area. Maybe it's her home office. She seems to be wearing like maybe 1960s clothing in the photo and hairstyle. Anyway, check it out. There are lots of links in the lecture. If you'd like to know more about Anne Sexton and her poetry, for the work that we read this week for class, there's a YouTube clip of Anne Sexton at home talking and reading her poetry. So that's really neat. Two clips, actually. And some rare film clips of Anne Sexton, again, reading her poetry. So several on YouTube. Another one with a panel discussion on YouTube with both Anne Sexton and another poet we're reading this week, Sylvia Plath. Actually, knew each other. And fellow contemporary poets Brenda Hillman, C.D. Wright, and Sharon Olds. Watch that. That's kind of interesting. And then there used to be a really funny video that I liked by English guy in Texas, but I can't find that on YouTube anymore, so I don't know. If I find it, I'll let you know. All right. Anyway, Anne Sexton, she's an American. She lived from, 1928, she was born, till 1974. Tragically, only till 46 years old. She was born Anne Harvey in Newton, Massachusetts, where she was sent to boarding school, junior college, and then modeling school. It's interesting. I don't think we've read about a female poet in our class yet who was sent to modeling school. So that's a new one. During younger years, Anne became very close to her aunt, who she called Nana. Who lived with them at the time. It's unclear exactly what led to Anne's later instability. Yeah, she had instability later on in life, sadly. Some researchers speculate that she was physically and or sexually abused by her parents, whereas others dispute this fact and assert that Anne had separation anxiety from her mother, a condition worsened by her going away to boarding school. So don't really know what exactly contributed, but there are theories. When she was only 19, Anne eloped with Alfred, quote-unquote, K.O. Sexton, despite her being engaged to someone else at the time. Her husband served in the Korean War, during which Anne was rumored to have taken lovers, and during which Anne also became a fashion model. So the modeling school, I guess, paid off. She became a fashion model. That's, again, another new one, right, for our female poets. When K.O. returned from the Korean War, he became a traveling salesman for Anne's father's company. Anne gave birth to her first child in 1953, after which Anne suffered her first major breakdown. Her beloved Nana, that aunt that she loved so much that she called Anna, died in 1954, and in 1955, Anne birthed her second child. During this time, Anne attempted suicide several times and experienced mental breakdowns that threw her into therapy and even institutions, and sent her children to live with their paternal grandparents, so the grandparents on the father's side. Anne's therapist noted Anne's creative ability and encouraged Anne to write as an outlet for her powerful feelings, which were sometimes diagnosed as postpartum depression, sometimes diagnosed as bipolarity. You remember Charlotte Perkins Gilman? Remember she had incredible postpartum depression. She was, of course, prescribed the rest cure, which told her to do the opposite, not to write, not to do anything creative at all. Yet here, thank heaven, things have progressed, right? Just like you remember Susan Glassbell, she was also encouraged to write when she was dealing with depression. So here we have Anne being encouraged to write by her therapist, and so she did. In 1957, Anne enrolled in a local poetry workshop, in fact, several local poetry workshops, where she met Sylvia Plath, another one of the authors we're reading this week. Isn't that neat? She also met Maxine Kumin, Robert Lowell. You remember Robert Lowell? He's a very famous poet. And you remember Amy Lowell? We read her last week. Yeah. And she is related to Robert Lowell, of course, and W.D. Snodgrass, and other talented, what we call confessional writers. Remember, we talked about confessional poetry, where it's kind of like they're confessing their inner feelings, innermost thoughts and feelings to the reader. So that is confessional poetry. During this time, Anne acquired the literary technical skills that so enhance her writing. Kind of like when Gwendolyn Brooks went away to the poetry workshops and she studied technique. And that's what really got her going on her poetic her career in poetry. So her parents, Anne's parents, that is, they died in 1959. And Anne's writing and breakdowns soared. Within 3 or so years, Anne's poetry made her a celebrity. So she's having breakdowns. She's writing to cope with the breakdowns. She's writing often confessional poetry. And poems make her a celebrity. But such status created a power imbalance in her marriage. So in 1966, Anne won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry for the collection of her poetry, Live or Die. All right, so if there was a power imbalance earlier, it's probably going to only get worse, right? When she's all of a sudden winning the Pulitzer Prize in poetry. We talked about some other women that we've studied very recently that have won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry. Carolyn Kaiser, Gwendolyn Brooks, so and I know we've had others too. So a lot of incredibly talented poets we're reading here. And continued to write voraciously despite more suicide attempts and hospitalizations. She even performed poetry readings accompanied by rock bands. So that's also, unusual and a very creative combination of her poetry with music. However, after a string of lovers, Anne actually asked K.O. for a divorce in 1973. After the divorce, Anne turned even more so to alcohol in the face of increasing depression. In 1974, she published the Death Notebooks, and later that year, after lunching with her friend who had just critiqued Anne's latest unpublished and more religiously charged writing, The Awful Rowing Toward God, that's the title of it, The Awful Rowing Toward God, Anne, perhaps inspired by good friend Sylvia Plath's earlier suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, she entered her garage, turned on her car, and gassed herself to death. Very, very sad ending to her life. Not old at all, 46 years old. Like other confessional poets, many of whom were Anne's close friends, Anne wrote of life issues so intimately in her poetry that they seemed personal and as such easily relatable. Such intimacy and personally relatable issues are evident in a poem of Anne's we read for class. Celebration of My Uterus, published in 1969. That's perhaps why these poems made her such a success, made her so popular, because people felt as if they were maybe reading something that they could relate to about issues that they might have experienced, reading interior, intimate thoughts that they have shared within themselves or even with other people. The other poem that we read for class of Anne Sexton's is called Cinderella. That one was published in 1971, so 3 years before her death, and only 2 years after In Celebration of My Uterus. That poem, Cinderella, speaks to the reader in intimate second person. Second person is when you use the you pronouns. We're talking about you and addressing the reader as you, while it also poses intriguing and even comical social commentary in the form of a skewered fairy tale. She takes that framework of Cinderella and addresses the reader with that to give us some social commentary on our own times, our own issues, issues shared by women, contemporary women, or at least later 20th century women. So, although sad that her life ended how it did and that she experienced so many breakdowns and depression and bipolarity, I hope you can learn from Anne Sexton and the poems of hers we read this week. I invite you